Hello and welcome to a post-game edition of the Silver Bulletin. I'm Alicia Graves, the Assistant Sports Director, and I'm here with Colin Hasshill and Edward Sutherland, the Sports Editor and the Assistant Sports Editor. First, let's touch on what was it like watching Ohio State beat Michigan State 48-3 after what happened last week against Iowa.
I mean, it was pretty astounding. I know that Colin has said throughout the week that it could have either been an Ohio State blowout, a Michigan State blowout, or really anything.
Yeah.
But I didn't think, and I kind of agreed with that I thought Ohio State could win by a blowout, but I didn't see this coming. I thought that at the very least, Michigan State would take advantage of a struggling pass defense. I thought especially without Jerome Baker and Dante Booker that the defense was really going to be in trouble heading into this game. And Ohio State's defense just shut down Michigan State offensively. They couldn't get anything going on the run. Pass-wise, there were a lot of really inaccurate passes from Lewerke, especially early. He was being pressured pretty much all game. The defensive line looked about as solid as it has all season. Defensively, it was probably Ohio State's best effort this season.
And just going off of that, in the first drive, first off, they start driving a little bit, and I lean over to you, I'm like, I picked Ohio State. I'm a little worried because when we were going into the game, I don't know, it was just like there just seemed like this lackadaisical attitude. Fans are just slow to get here. It's just like the stakes are so much lower than last week, which we thought that they were going to potentially be in the playoff. And now that there's no chance to that, it just didn't feel right. And then after they got that Malik Harrison sack, and then Nick Bosa had another sack later that drive that got them back far enough that they had to punt. They just kept rolling and rolling and rolling, and throughout the game, you're right, Michigan State did absolutely nothing. There's no point where I remember being like, except for the very beginning of the first drive, where I'm like, Lewerke's really working it right now. They're moving the ball. Ohio State, I agree, best game defensively the entire season.
In the last couple of weeks, there has been a lot of criticism about J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber not getting enough touches, especially after last week's game against Iowa. There were a lot of questions about that to Urban Meyer, and in the last couple of weeks, Urban Meyer said he didn't want to micromanage, but following that game, they wanted to give J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber more carries, and it showed today in the game. Mike Weber had two breakout touchdowns, a 48-yard one and an 82-yard one, and J.K. Dobbins played exceptionally well. Was this what the team needed? What would have changed if this happened in Iowa last week too?
I mean, it's sort of tough to say how much this would have changed the game against Iowa. The only reason that I say that is because to a certain degree, I think that Coach Meyer did have a point that late in the game, like especially in the second half, Ohio State was down enough that they did kind of have to pick up the yards and bulk a bit. I would say, though, that Ohio State didn't even run the ball a lot in the first half, as much as they probably should have against Iowa. And that was where it really hurt them. Because that's sort of, for the past couple of years, that's always really been Ohio State's identity, is just running the football, pounding it with these running backs like Zeke Elliott, with Mike Weber, and now with J.K. Dobbins. And I think in today's game, you sort of saw that when Ohio State is working and its offense is at its best, it's when the run game is working well and effectively. The offensive line is freeing up holes for the running backs to go through. Mike Weber is looking fully healthy, and I mean, it's just the offense just looks different when the run game is being used properly and being used frequently.
And they used it properly early, and I know that you mentioned that's the key for Ohio State. And that very first drive that they had out here, they had 3 rushes. Mike Weber finished it off with a 48-yard touchdown. They come back later at the end of the first quarter. They end it with an 11-play. I think it was a 72-yard drive. 8 of the plays were rushes, and that's just one of those where they just got to go bam, bam, bam all the way down the field, and they got to run the ball until they can't run anymore. And they didn't do that last week. And that's honestly I know you said that it might not have changed the outcome, and I sort of do agree. I mean, 31 points is a big deficit. Yeah. But if they extend the game and they keep it close, and honestly they play better when they run the ball, I don't know. It's a week too late, and I think I wrote that after the game when Urban said that there's going to be a mandate to get J.K. the ball, to get Mike Weber the ball. It's a week too late, and it's great that they did it. I mean, now they have a chance to win the Big Ten and go to a bowl game, and I don't know, they can end the season out well, but ultimately they're not going to end up where they wanted to. And to me, honestly, it's just going to be because they didn't have this mandate earlier.
And Ohio State's defense struggled last week against Iowa, and coming into the game, Urban Meyer said in his post-game press conference that there was a little anxiety going into this game because Jerome Baker was out, Dante Booker was out. How do you think the linebackers performed today despite losing these two key players?
I thought on the first drive, sort of that one where Colin had said that he was a little bit unsure about how well Ohio State's defense would do. They looked a little bit shaky there. It was pretty clear that especially that like Malik Harrison was he seemed a little bit out of sorts. Tuff Borland missed a couple of tackles as well. But after that first drive, they seemed to settle in really well. Malik Harrison got his first career sack. Tuff Borland made a couple of big tackles for loss in the game. And Chris Worley looked about as comfortable at linebacker as he has all year. Now, part of that's probably because he's more of a natural outside linebacker than a middle linebacker. And I don't think that it would necessarily be the most surprising thing to see Worley playing outside more often for the rest of the season. This was a unit that actually looked really strong despite missing two of its starters, one of them Jerome Baker, who I think a lot of people will admit is one of the best up-and-coming linebackers in the country.
Should be. I think he's disappointed a lot of people this year.
And I would agree with that. I think that he has. And I think that this performance by the linebackers today was exactly what Ohio State needed, and it came from a couple of very unlikely sources.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to Lewerke because when I was looking at this matchup, it just seems to me that Ohio State has really had their struggles against these dual threat guys that maybe they can avoid the rush for 4 seconds. And if they avoid the rush for 4 seconds, Ohio State's D-backs have had trouble staying with wideouts for that long. I'm going to give credit to Schiano because, one, the defensive backs, I think, played their best game of the year, just in that they turned the ball over. And they honestly just didn't give up those. When Lewerke would scramble, it's not like there would be a wide open guy like there seemed to always be in a lot of games that Ohio State had this year. That just wasn't the case. And also, I don't think that Michigan State had the greatest game plan in the world because it seemed like they wanted to have Lewerke just sit back there in the pocket for 4 seconds and observe the field. And against Ohio State, that's going to be a problem, and it was a problem. And I remember Nick Bosa after the game, he said that they learned quickly. And at Michigan's, that to me was their plan A. They didn't really have a good plan B. And I think that that's sort of on Michigan State as well.
All right, and that's all we have for you this week on the post-game Silver Bulletin. Make sure to tune in Monday for highlights and recap of today's game. See you next week.